Welcome home. We are WNST. House of Baltimore. Baltimore positive. We're positively into 4th of July week. At some point, the Orioles might win a game. We will be back after it. We had such a good time at Pappas on Tuesday. You'll hear it all week long. Some old friends, some new friends, some former rivals, and John Patty at WBAL joining us here, as well as old friends like Steve Elliott from Elliott Chiropractic and some new friends as well over Paps. We're going to be at Fadley's on the 12th of July. That's Friday when the Yankees come in here. Hopefully, we're not too many foreign games back after the All-Star break and before the All-Star break, but after the 4th of July. That is Friday the 12th. We will be there courtesy of our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We'll have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away down at Lexington Market on the 12th. This guy's going to watch a lot of baseball between now and then, and hopefully he'll get down to Wildwood with his family and do his Max Pizza thing. But it's getting to be about that time, and I called it a June swoon out on Facebook, Luke Jones, and I don't know. I mean, we could sit here and go with the sky is falling and all that. I mean, you and I have discussed what would happen if they don't make the pitching better, and that was before they started losing pitching. Um, you know, they need to improve in a lot of different ways, and certainly hitting the baseball is something that's a little disconcerting the last couple of days, not last week, but this week. Um, I don't want to say I'm too concerned about this, but they're playing good teams right now, and I don't like losing to good teams, especially not at home.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat a five-game losing streak. It's the first time they've lost five in a row since just a few days before Adley Rutschman arrived in the majors. I mean, that's how long it's been. So it's both a credit to them, but also a reminder of, you know, it's baseball and you can be humbled, and you can really be humbled when you're starting to spring some leaks in terms of your pitching. Now, Tuesday night, I think was such a frustrating affair because you score eight times, your offense, that should be more than enough to win with even mediocre pitching. But even the offense on Tuesday night, and this is what made this loss so frustrating, they're 1 for 11 with runners in scoring position. They left runners on base. They had the bases loaded, nobody out in the seventh inning, and scored one run. They had two men on, uh, stranded in the eighth inning after the Santander home run. They had the tying run at the plate in the ninth inning. But this is why I said to you a couple of days ago, this Cleveland bullpen, it gets laid early because they've been that good. But we don't want it. We certainly aren't going to bury the lead here, which is Cole Irvin, which is Yennier Cano in the late innings. They didn't pitch well. I mean, that was a lousy pitching performance, and McCann with an error that certainly hurt Cole Irvin's effort. But Irvin was hit hard, and one of the lost elements of the big win over the Yankees last week, as you and I were sitting at Costas Inn, the Orioles jump out to the big lead, and I think you made the comment that Cole Irvin needs to give them at least 6 innings today. It'd be great to give him 7. He didn't get through 5, and he got knocked out of the game because he's hit hard. He was crushed on Tuesday night. I mean, that was as uncompetitive or non-competitive as he's looked all year. And that's concerning when you look at the state of their current starting rotations. So,
Well, pitching's weird, man, because like your arm feels good in April and it feels like crud in June because you've been throwing. And for any of these pitchers, I liken it to yoga with me. Yoga feels good the first time, the second day. You do 5 days in a row, it starts to hurt. and
yeah,
I think pitching is sort of one of those things. And looking good in April and feeling good in April, you get out of spring training, you're winding into things, it's springtime. Then it's 100 degrees out and you're making your 12th or your 15th or your 18th or your 20th start. And then it's August and stuff starts to not be as effective as it was. In the same way, you don't run the 20th mile of the marathon at the same speed you run the fifth, right? Literally.
yeah, and I don't even know how much of it is velocity or stuff, as much as his command wasn't good. Now, he didn't walk anyone, so it wasn't a control issue, but his command was not good. If you look at where the target was he hitting the target? Yes, he was still throwing strikes, but you're catching too much of the plate, and you're someone like Cole Irvin, who is not someone that's a high velo, high swing and miss kind of guy. You need to be precise, especially against the Yankees last week, and obviously Cleveland on Tuesday night, knowing what the Guardians are capable of doing offensively. So, it's one of those scenarios right now where whatever your priors were in terms of how you felt about the Orioles, this 5-game losing streak has most likely exacerbated that in terms of the pitching. I still want to remind everyone that this team went 49-25 over its first 74 games, and a 5-game losing streak certainly doesn't cancel that out, should not cancel that out, does not cancel that out. But at the same time, when you've had some concerns about your pitching and your pitching has looked like it's looked over the last week, with what Monday being the exception, I guess, you're going to be concerned, and there's going to be more urgency from Mike Elias to continue working the phones. And again, I've said to you, it's easier said than done in terms of figuring out who exactly are the buyers, who exactly are the sellers right now. And you don't want to completely give away your farm system for a pitcher that isn't necessarily going to move the needle a ton. But at the same time, you don't want this to snowball. And as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, and I said this when the Orioles had lost 4 in a row, it doesn't change entirely because they've lost a 5th in a row. But the biggest thing here is not to let 0-5 turn into 6-14, right? You don't want this to extend and become a 3-week period where it is really starting to impact your record, the standings. The saving grace here is the New York Yankees have suddenly forgot how to win games too. They've lost 7 of their last 9. So if someone had told you 3 weeks ago the Orioles would have a 5-game losing streak, you'd fear maybe they'd be 7 or 8 games out now. The way that the Yankees had been playing, Yankees are scuffling as well. That's not to make everything okay. It's a reminder that it's a long season, and suddenly the 2 super heavyweights in the AL East are both struggling. So the saving grace here is they haven't lost a lot of ground in the AL East. They're 2 games back.
Hold on a second. You just said the 2 heavyweights. Hold on. The Guardians are the better team, better than either one of them. Who's beating the Orioles. But I'm just saying, like, but in the American League, like, the Guardians are good. We treat the Yankees and you know, look, I talked to Munch the other day. I've had Daryl Ryder on, my Cleveland Mafia coming in here. They were thinking Bieber was going to be part of a sale back in March. They were thinking Tito's gone. This is no good. I've almost compared it to the 83 Orioles with Altobelli. And I always compare that because I've watched that Game 5 that I was at up in the vet many, many times on bus trips. And Howard Cosell was in the booth with Earl Weaver, really riding him hard in the 6th and 7th inning about not being a part of it. And I think this Cleveland team, I don't know how Tito would feel about it if they go win the World Series this year, or Hargrove or any of the rest of them that tried to climb that mountain. But, I want to tip my cap to the Guardians because we talk about doing things the right way and how they do it. And the Yankees spend money and the Dodgers and all these. Cleveland is this case study, and I know you brought this up over the weekend with me. Maybe even Thursday we were having a beverage over at Costas. Just they've won a lot of games the last 10 years. You go look at their records, a lot of 90s in there. And they don't spend money, and they let guys walk away. And look, man, I'm in love with Westberg like you are. You're more in love with Henderson than I am because I just keep waiting for it to sort of come back to the mean at some point. I don't expect them to look like, the natural. For maybe he will. I don't know. I mean, you love him. And people love Rutschman. I don't know where the money's going for any of these guys. That's the issue for both of us. I don't even know how much money Mr. Rubenstein has. I'm of the belief that he doesn't even own the team yet, that John Angelo and his family are still, and I don't have a press conference to ask those questions, but where the money will look like this summer for the obvious needs the Orioles have. They're going to wind up trading some of the guys in their system to get better. I don't know what that means for starters, relievers, who it's going to be, whether it's going to be Norby or Mayo or Kerstad or whomever. It won't be Cowser this year, right? But the young guys, and they start dealing things out. This is where when I have longer conversations with people not as smart as you, by the way, about baseball, well, this deal, this, do that. Okay, now 3 years from now, you have no Norby, and Henderson's $48 million, and all of a sudden, Corbin Burns is on the 3rd year of his deal with the Dodgers or whoever's going to pay him, and Ortiz is in his 3rd All-Star game, and you start to look around and you say, okay, how long can we continue to grow talent like this without putting it on the field and giving it away to try to win back in 24? And That's their dilemma. That's not my dilemma. And if I sat here and talked to Mike Elias, I would talk to him about it reasonably. But instead, we make the conjecture about all this. But I do it with my eyes, like you. We'll see what they do between now and the end of the year, and whether they spend money, and whether Mr. Rubenstein's Mr. Money Pockets, and what their limitations would be. But no matter what, seeing the ballpark empty the last couple of nights when they're great and coming back and like all of that, I am extremely concerned with the original sin, which is who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for a real 150, $175 million team if you're dealing away young players? And when I'm at Pappas and people come to me and talk baseball, they're like, we need pitching. We need pitching. We got young. We got the best farm and okay, great. So go dealing 3 to 5 of those guys away the next 6 weeks. And if you don't win this year for whatever reason, because if you win, you get 5 years apiece. At least they're going to get 5 years apiece from me if they win the World Series. I won't care what they do in 27 or 28 or who they sign or who they don't. I mean, I will, but winning a World Series, not getting to a World Series. Talk to Cleveland about that. Talk to other people about that. Not just getting there, winning the World Series. They need to do that in the next 36 months. They're going to get 3 passes at this before it gets way more complicated. And they're going to need more than 18,000 out there on Monday night or Tuesday night. They're going to need money. They're going to need to finance this somehow. Sponsorship, TV revenue. Your niece is going down and making you spend $300 on a Sunday afternoon so they can run the bases. I'm seeing this for the big picture of, yeah, they need pitching. And what are they going to do about it? How much money are they going to spend? But more than that, how many resources are they going to spend? Because I think we're all of the mindset at base level where they are. And this isn't a 5-game losing streak. We would have said this at the bar last Thursday when they're winning. They're going to need more pitching. And they're going to have to give up something substantial to get more pitching.
Yeah. And again, who's available? And that's why there were people the last couple off seasons looking at the pitching market, whether it was Nathan Eovaldi 2 winters ago, looking at some of the guys that were available this year. And look, Mike Elias did go out and get Corbin Burns, one of the best pitchers in baseball. So, albeit on a rental, but he still got him.
I saw Dallas Keuchel moving around. That was, okay. I mean, I hear that. I mean, we might as well go get Lincecum and Barry Zito to come
what's Jim Palmer up to? I mean,
right, exactly. But I mean, I'm seeing teams trying things. I don't even know what that means, whether you want Dallas Keuchel be at the end of your bench or not. But this is, it's getting real now. We're 5 weeks out on this, and you know who else is going to be looking for pitching? I learned this week. This is where you and I are like, let's get a starter. Depends what it costs. Who do they want? They can't have this guy. They can't have that guy. They can't have Holiday. All of that stuff. And we don't even know who we're talking about here. But then I talked to the Cleveland people, and they're like, we see their starting pitching, and we're like, well, they would like one too. Like we're not going to be the only people out there bidding for a starting pitcher.
Yeah, well, and that's the point I was bringing up was that's why I question, and it's not a Mike Elias thing, and I continue to see even some media personalities just hammering Elias for where their pitching is right now, and my big question was, where were the realities with the payroll the last couple winters? Now, they signed Kyle Gibson 2 winters ago. They signed Jordan Lyles the year before that, and obviously Lyles was still kind of pre-competitive, right? They were just becoming competitive.
It felt like they had point. 6, 8, 10 million around that to make it feel like they had a dude. They had one guy that had been in the big leagues a couple of years. I mean, we're coming off 118 losses, right? Like, whatever that was in 18, 19, 20, 21. But they did put a resource into that, or Mike put a resource into that.
Yeah, but I guess my question is, could you have done more 2 winters ago when guys like me were clamoring for an Eovaldi kind of signing? And it didn't have to be him. Let's be clear about that, but someone of that ilk. It's not as though he got $175 million, right? Go look at what the numbers were. You'd like to think the Orioles could afford that. They could have. There's enough national TV revenue that's passed along the teams that could have been done easily.
Well, you're on the original sin of whether they have money and how poor Mr. Angelo.
Right.
Yeah. They've got money. They've always had money to do anything they want.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. They have money. It's just a matter. We can debate how much. We could certainly debate where the payroll could potentially go. but it could certainly go higher. It couldn't have been any lower the last couple of years. So that's where I look at the conundrum that they're in now, where look, you have the prospects to make these moves. But to your point, and you talked about this a couple minutes ago, I'm going to sit here and continue to say it because everything we've seen to this point in the Mike Elias era does not lead me to believe that he's going to push all the chips in this year to the point where it is going to compromise them big time next year, the year after that, and the year after that. That doesn't mean they're not going to trade any prospects at all. They've traded prospects already, and they will make some moves here. But one, who is available? Two, who are you willing to give up to get those individuals who might be available? So that's where I look at this, and that's where I think it's been such a missed opportunity that you couldn't have made another savvy pitching signing. But I'm not putting that all on Mike Elias by any stretch because, again, what were his realities in terms of what he could spend on payroll the last 2 winters? So, it's right now we're throwing darts as media and fans in terms of trying to determine who are buyers, who are sellers. We've all heard 3 weeks ago, you and I were talking about, oh, maybe you bring back someone like Kyle Gibson. Well, the Cardinals are in the thick of the wild card race in the NL. The Mets and Severino, that's a name that I was listening to MLB Network on Sirius the other day, and they were talking about Severino as someone that might be attractive on the open market. Well, the Mets have suddenly started playing better, and are they going to sell? So, it really is. There's an obvious need. We know that. There will be pitchers available. We know that. However, how many high impact pitchers are going to be available? And if you're Mike Elias, are you going to overpay for someone that will help, but isn't necessarily going to be the guy that's going to move the needle to the point where you're breaking through in October? So,
well, the nervousness for me as a fan, and if I were involved with this, would be the Corbin Burnes conundrum, which is you might only have him this October.
Yeah.
So if you think that this is your October and you're only going to have these guys, I mean, Santander, Hayes coming off the bench, Mullins. Look, man, this team's stacked. We've talked about this. This is the best team we've seen in our lifetime in Baltimore based on where the young players are, how they're performing, even the veterans, even Santander with all his home runs this month. But the pitching, we keep coming back to it and saying, how much is enough? How late do you want to wait? Do you want a 3, a 4, or 5? How much is it going to cost you in a trade? If you get a really good pitcher, are you going to throw $6, $8, $10 million? And I guess Rubenstein will do that. I mean, I don't know him. I've met some of his people. They're nice. I would assume he's a billionaire and we just think he's Mr. Bunny money bags and like all that he'll just go all in and he wants to win and he's 74 years old. That's all fun for him. This is where a crazy owner would say I don't care what we do. I just bought the team. I'm 74. I don't care about 2028. We're going to win now because I want to be a hero now. And we got $600 million from the state. We're going to do this and that. And I want to be a hero. You see me handing hats out? You see me signing autographs? I want to be a hero. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know Rubenstein's. I've learned enough about him in 8 weeks enough to know that I probably will never meet him. And if I do, he will have his ears filled with garbage. So, I mean, we're never going to get that feedback other than like on draft day with Eric DeCosta by what they do. We'll find out what they do, and then we'll measure it and judge it. But I think it's very, very hard to predict. Given the Angelos people running the team still, Rubenstein hasn't made one hire. I am of the opinion he doesn't really own the team. I am of the opinion that the Angelos family still has their 60% and Mr. Rubenstein hasn't cleared the stock because I haven't seen a headline about that yet. And you haven't either. And they haven't had that press conference yet. So I don't even know how convoluted it might be. The Angelos family's still involved in this. Greg Bader's running it. So money-wise with Mike Elias, I cannot be predictive of how crazy this will be, but it is a strange confluence of events where this is a great team. And I'm 55. I can't wait all night either, right? You've never seen them win. So when they have a chance to win, I mean, let's just say Soto goes down for the Yankees or they have a big injury above and beyond whatever they have. Let's say that Aaron Judge takes one on the wrist and actually can't play. And the Orioles really have a strength going into October with good health, good fortune. Burns is fine. Rodriguez is fine. Maybe they even win the division by 4 games. That expectation on the Ravens last year for Lamar in year, 5, now going year 6, 7, for him, I think the Orioles, you would say it's getting early, late, or late, early, however we would say that. I don't feel like they have to win the World Series this year, but I know one thing pretty sure. Corbin Burns is as good as it's going to get standing there in game 1, and they might not have that over the next 5 years, and they have it now. And that would be my case. If I'm writing a column today, dear Mr. Rubenstein, please spend the fans' money and bring player. This is complicated because of the long-term part of the Norbies and the Kerstedts and what they would cost to play here the next couple years. I looked at Ortiz. I mean, the Brewers wound up getting rid of a guy they weren't going to sign that they couldn't afford, and they wind up getting a guy that's going to play there for 5 years on the absolute cheap in a market that needs absolute cheap, not the Yankees or the Dodgers. Orioles still need absolute cheap. I've seen the upper deck. I've seen the fans. I've seen the Masson dispute. I know the Washington people aren't coming back. I mean, unless they really grow the brand here with baseball, they are what they are. They have the fans they have who spend the money they spend. I don't know how that gets the franchise into a better place 3-4 years from now. Once they start buying Rutschman and Henderson at market value, then you know they're not going to have the pitchers. And unless they grow at 4 more Grayson Rodriguez's, the Burns thing for me in October makes this much, much more crucial that they win the World Series. And they have to win the World Series this year because I wouldn't believe in them as much if they don't have the kind of number 1 starter they have up top like they do this year. It's the reason I believe in them right now is Corbin Burns. I mean that.
That's fair. I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about that. I don't think they're going to re-sign Corbin Burns. Again, that's another one of those unknowns until we see what ownership looks like in terms of spending and all that. It's a complete unknown. But
well, I know they won't have the money now. Whether Mr. Rubenstein wants to be generous and you be the king,
they'd have the money to do it if they want to. But it's just a matter of then what does that mean you can't do down the line in terms of keeping other players? You can sign any player in baseball that you want to. It's just, okay, what does that mean? The salary cap's the same way. You can sign any team in the league can sign their franchise quarterback, but then what does that mean for parts A, B, and C of your roster and players 1, 2, 3, and 4 that you're going to have to sign at some point over the next 2 to 3 years? So there's always the hidden cost. It's not even a hidden cost. It's just the cost of it in terms of, opportunity, opportunity lost or gained depending on each move. But I'm not going to sit here and say that they shouldn't be trying to do everything they possibly can. That's why it's so frustrating. I did have to chuckle when you presented the example of if Soto or Aaron Judge goes down for the Yankees and the Orioles are healthy. Well, the Orioles, they're not healthy. That's why we're talking about the pitching right now, because they've had 3 guys undergoing season-ending elbow surgeries who would. 2 of them definitely be in their rotation in Bradish and Means, and Tyler Wells is going to fit in somewhere.
And if they don't win the World Series, we'll look back and say, what would have happened if we didn't have Bradish and Means?
Sure.
And I am concerned right now about them in a short series. I really am. I am concerned about a lot of different things. The way they played last year, the youth part of it, the bullpen part of it right now, that if they had to go out and navigate October right now, if October started right now and they're the 4 seed, whatever they are, whoever they have to play, but hey, by Monday they could be in first place, right? I mean, right? So, but if they had to play right now and play 3-4 series and the next month constructed as they're constructed, and they're healthy offensively. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I go back to Markakis, being injured and how that kind of screwed things up. It only takes one. I mean, and if they have to play in October without Westberg, without Rutschman, without any of these guys, they'll be a diminished team, and we're talking about them playing the rest of the year now without their former Cy Young candidate from last year and another guy that they thought was going to come back from Tommy John. You always say, well, you never know. Well, there goes your never know. Because when he went under it 2 years ago, they thought, oh, man, all-star break at 24. He'll be back. Might not be a 1, but he might be a 3. We might have Corbin Burns by then, and Rodriguez might be up, and we might not need him to be the dude. But man, this thing really smells different. Burns, Rodriguez, Bradish, Means. The real
Yeah.
John Means. This thing smells like that smells like Smoltz, Glavin, Avery Maddox kind of formidable, really formidable in October. I don't know that this feels formidable to me right now. The
Well,
offense does, but not the pitch.
you still have Corbin Burns. I still think before it's all said and done, okay, would you rather Grayson Rodriguez be your 3 in October than your 2? He's still in that category to me. I still feel he's going to be in that category. I should say. But yeah,
But a two's not Kyle Gibson. A two's not Jordan. I mean,
sure,
a two is somebody that was competing for the Cy Young last year. You know what I mean? Like
sure. I hear you.
I don't know where that's coming from without raping the system, and then without a real belief. And whether this is John Angelos and Mama Angelos owning 60% of the stock, or whether this is Mr. Rubenstein saying I'm the primary, and it's my money and my future and all that. I'm really interested in the poker cards for this year,
Yeah.
and whether last year it felt like we have plenty of time. I don't know. I mean, I don't. It doesn't feel that way when you start losing pitchers for real that aren't coming back, and when you start looking at the system and Holiday spent time down, the last couple of weeks, and saying where's the team going to be in September, and it needs to look like a different team than what we envisioned in April because it's not going to be that team. And as good as they were in April and May, as bad as they've been this week in various ways, and I'm not judging them on 5 losses. I'm just saying this is a real wake up call for their deficiencies as comprised right now, not a month ago when they had more pitching and they're having press conferences about a 6-man rotation, and 4 of them you'd be happy to start in game 2 of the World Series if you had to. That's seeing Irvin, seeing the bottom of this thing right now. Where are you on Povich, by the way? You and I didn't even discuss him on Tuesday so much. Where are you, having seen him a couple of times?
Interested, not ready to call him an answer, but put it this way, I have more hope on him than Albert Suarez, who I still think is best suited for a relief role. Uh, he's got more upside than Cole Irvin. Look, Cole Irvin was, until the last couple times out, Cole Irvin was one of the unsung heroes of this roster. So I hear everything you're saying. And don't get me wrong, I've been talking about them needing more bullpen arms since spring training, right? So
now I'm worried about the starters.
Well, but the bullpen's still a major issue. I do want to remind you, though, the Texas Rangers did not have this amazing starting rotation. On paper, they were where the Orioles were a year ago. Right around this time last year is when Jacob deGrom underwent Tommy John surgery. They're Corbin Burns. They're Corbin Burns who's signed long term. They obviously Evaldi and Jordan Montgomery were so big for them, but who was their number 3 starter until Scherzer came back later in October? Point is, so much of what we're talking about here, and yes, they need more pitching, and I agree with that. And they're going to add more pitching. Who's it going to be? We're going to see. Everyone who's going to be available, there are going to be question marks about. Even someone like Garrett Crochet, who is the big name being talked about because of how amazing and impressive he's been for the White Sox. And he's young. The peripherals look amazing, all of that. Go look at how many innings he threw last year, how many innings he has already thrown this year, and tell me how you're going to navigate that to try to keep a young pitcher fresh to have bullets for October. Now, don't get me wrong. I think if you could acquire a pitcher of that ilk for the next few years, my goodness, great. But he's already thrown so many innings and you still have half a season to go. And, I guess the point I'm making here is this isn't about July, August, and September. Yes, you need to navigate August, July, and September, but this team's going to be in the playoffs. They're not going to completely fall apart. I'm not going to sit here and let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that that's what you were implying whatsoever, but I'm not going to sit here and judge them off the last week compared to a team that was 24 games over 500 less than a week ago over their first 74 games. The body of work still suggests that they're going to be fine. Now, fine doesn't equate to optimizing, having the optimal chance to win the World Series, but they still have so much talent. They still have so much going for them. They have so many resources in their farm system that they could trade.
By
I'm
the
going to
way,
throw
dude's
this
got
out there.
130 strikeouts in 90 innings. Wow.
That's what I'm saying. He's been amazing, but go look at how many innings did he toss last year, and then you say, okay, how do you keep him fresh? How do you not run him into the ground workload wise and keep him healthy for having that in October? And look, I know the innings restrictions and limits and pitch count limits and all the things that all these teams do is still more guesswork than anything definitive. But at the same time, I think if you look at a pitcher's workload, we talked about this a lot last year, Nestor. Look at what has happened since then. We talked about this, that Kyle Bradish threw a career high. Grayson Rodriguez threw a career high. Dean Kramer threw a career high. Tyler
Tyler
Wells.
Wells got shut down and then got hurt, right?
Yeah.
Literally.
And look, I'm not at all
Means
implying
got
that,
shut down and got hurt.
well,
Radish got shut down and got hurt.
I
So
mean,
they all
means,
got shut down. They all had timeouts. They all had, and they're all getting cut on. Anyway,
right. Well, and John Means a little bit different there because it had nothing to do with workload. He came back from Tommy John, and I would assume
make it.
it didn't take, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he made 4 starts in September last year and 4 starts this year. I mean, that's not overuse or anything like that. He just wasn't healthy. But the
It is
point
an
about
amazing thing. We talk about this as my knee hurts as a 55-year-old guy from being cut on 20 years ago, that we're like, oh, Tommy John, he comes back from it. He made 4 starts. And I'm like, do you know how hard it is to throw the ball 92 miles an hour and to get back to that level and say that it didn't take or it didn't? I mean, just the fact that they ever get back on the hill and can do it once ever again. Because there's things with my knee that just trying to go out and hit a tennis ball when you get older. It's amazing that these guys can come back and recover to the point where they can do this at that level, and then it falls apart again. And that's the really sad part for the kids, for the people that are doing this. But they put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and they promise this. Maybe we'll try it. That guy did it, and that guy did it, and that guy did it. And for Means, I think that you and I over the last 2 years have been optimistic that he would come back. I'm getting less optimistic on this Tommy John thing as far as, oh, Batista will be here next October. Will he? Really? You're throwing 102? Really? We'll see.
I mean, let's also be clear, and I've talked about this a lot when people were so eager to cut on Kyle Bradish back in February and March. The return rate for Tommy John is very good relative to where it was 20 or 30 years ago, certainly where it was when the original Tommy John had the surgery, but it's not 100%. So that's where you do look at this offseason, and this is where, again, I don't know how much of this is Mike Elias and how much of this was just the state of where ownership was. And, John Angelos hadn't spent any money other than the token one-year contract for a starting pitcher the last couple off season. And I guess this year it was Craig Kimbrell because, David Rubin, he was signed before David Rubenstein came into the picture. But that's where you look at it and say, and we even talked about it. They could have used another starting pitcher even without knowing what was going to happen here. It's not as though they couldn't have used that because there were some questions. Not that anyone knew about Bradish until January, but it's like I just said, and I remember vividly saying this to you when we were talking. We had this conversation on a regular basis last summer about the starting rotation and the number of pitchers that had exceeded career highs. And I said to you, and I know this not because of my own experience, but just listening to other really smart people like Will Carroll, who've talked about sports injuries for years, they've often said the key for a pitcher when you're talking about his workload exceeding a career high or setting a new career high is the following spring. And unfortunately, that's when it showed up with Kyle Bradish. Tyler Wells was April. John Means was slow played throughout the offseason because of how he felt early October last year. 4 starts and suddenly it's bothering him. So
but that's my point is once you get back to the second start, third start, fourth start, you're like, okay, he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And he's not. And
it's not always that way, right?
Yeah. And I think that's that's the hardest part for the Means thing is that he did make it back. He was effective. He was doing it at the highest level. And then he's not anymore. And I don't know, man. That's like trying to hug a ghost. You know what I mean? You're trying to capture something you can't capture. And I don't know enough about the arm. I just know I watch these guys do this and think It's kind of ungodly that they go out there, and it's amazing that Jim Palmer could do it for 20 years at the and still be 75 and make fun of these young guys that can't get to 212 innings. But it's a max effort issue, right? When I hear
Yeah.
Dave Johnson, Dave and I talked about this last week, and he's been our constant companion the last couple of days since Jim Palmer got COVID last week. You know, Dave, I ran into him at Jamie Costello's party, and we were just talking, and it was the weekend that everything went down with Bradish and all those guys. And he was just talking about like, yeah, I topped out at 89 miles an hour on my
Yeah.
fastball, but I didn't throw 89 every pitch or to blow my arm out. Even at 89, he can't fathom this max effort, max effort, max effort, max effort that everybody's throwing every pitch as hard as they can. That really is the difference, not just in Jim Palmer's era, but in Dave Johnson's era, and how they view it and how they're burning these guys out and burning them to the ground, and everybody's getting cut on when it wasn't this way in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, some guys got wrecked, but I got baseball cards with Whitey Ford and Don Drysdale and Bob, all of these people that did things that they wouldn't allow pitchers to do now, and those guys lasted 40 years. Satchel Paige was still striking out guys in his 50s. I like they're clearly doing something wrong, with this. And with all the science they have, you think they'd be getting better at this. And the better is, to your point, shut them down, slow them down, pitch count, all of these things. And none of it's successful, really, across the grain of the last 60 years of baseball. It's worse than it's ever been. And they're pitching less than they've ever pitched and making more than they've ever made and putting more tax, not just on a roster with 13 pitchers and all that. The state of pitching's crazy in baseball. And it's crazier here because we've had 3 guys hurt the last month and we've lost 5 in a row, so we're talking about it now. But it's probably good we're talking about it because if they won 3 of the last 5, we wouldn't be talking about the pitching, and maybe they wouldn't think they need more. But the headline is Orioles need pitching. That really is the headline.
I mean, I don't think that this has changed Mike Elias's view on it. I think he knew he needed pitching. I think this is again, a lot of this has to do with everyone's priors. Even when their pitching statistics were excellent, even as of a week ago, and I've been saying that over and over, and I'm not going to change my tune to that because I'm going to look at data and stats. But they knew they needed pitching. Something interesting you said. You said pitching's worse than it's ever been. From a durability and longevity standpoint, yes. Performance wise, guys are throwing harder with more break and more swing and miss than ever. So it's better
and
in that way.
Keeping the doctors real busy too.
But sure. I mean, the thing we need to understand and remember, and we there are examples people will remember over the years in Baltimore. Even pitchers have always gotten hurt. 80 years ago, when a pitcher got hurt, had a UCL injury, even though they wouldn't have called it that back then because they didn't have the imaging and the sophisticated tests to be able to determine all that. They just went away. I mean, a pitcher would be in the league a few years and then suddenly they'd disappear, or maybe they'd show up in some low-level minor leagues 4 years later trying to make a comeback.
Well, if you go back and you look at All-Star game boxes, you'll see a bunch of pitchers' names that got there one time, right?
Yeah.
And like, what happened to that guy? And in some cases, the Lamar Hoyts, the off the Denny McClains, the off the field issues, alcoholism being primary, over baseball over the last 60 years. If you read the Steve Dalkowski story, any booze and baseball and all of that, 8 pitchers up. But I would really, again, if I knew these people and I had a press pass like you do, I would ask Mike Elias, feel like he could have managed this differently? And I don't think they could have, right? You think there's anything different you could have done with Batista to not get him hurt? You think there's anything different we could have done with Bradish or Means, even on the other end of this, or even Wells, who you were a little nervous about last June, July? You pulled him up when you're in the middle of a pennant race. And so I don't think that I think all their scientists and doctors and trainers. I saw Brian Ebel out there attending the Mateo the other night, whom I love. Love Brian Ebel. Tell him I said hello if you see him, by the way. I thought of him and I thought, there's one good dude, Brian Ebel. I don't think they would manage it any differently. I think they're managing it by the modern book, and the modern books put 4 guys under. I don't know, dude. I'm an Oriole fan of my life. I don't remember 4 pitchers getting knifed in 6 months around here. And I know when Harbaugh was getting players hurt out there the last couple years. The goofy trainer that came down here from Philadelphia that gave them all COVID and shut the building down, and all the players ripping that guy in the aftermath after injuries happen. The Orioles side of this, I'm not blaming. I'm saying this is baseball. That's just the way it goes. You got 4 guys down. Every team has 4 guys down. Well, maybe y'all are doing something wrong. I keep thinking about it that way. That we're sitting here 4 weeks ago with 6-man rotation, and today we're like, oh my god, we don't have pitching. It's just certainly the game has changed. That's all I'm going to say. The game has changed in that way, and we now need pitching in a way that they shouldn't have needed this much pitching. They had pitching a couple of weeks ago.
Well, and that's where I look at this and look, that I just said 10 minutes ago that, yeah, they probably could have stood to, would have been to their benefit to add another starter. It didn't have to be another number 1 or number 2 like Corbin Burns, who they did acquire, but someone else to, whether it was re-signing Kyle Gibson or someone of that ilk, let's
We always
say.
bring him up, and
I mean, he's just an example more than the individual himself.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, what you just said, look, as much as everyone here in Baltimore was puffing out their chest because the Orioles won 101 games and overtook the Rays, go look at why the Rays couldn't keep up the pace that they had over the first 3 months last year. They lost McClanahan. They lost, I mean, you mentioned 4 guys in the last 6 months.
Cleveland doesn't have Bieber.
Yeah, I mean, but the Rays have been through it. I mean, there have been other teams that have been through it where you just get hammered with pitching injuries in 1 year. I mean, we talked about this with the Ravens in 2021, and they had all the ACLs and Achilles injuries. I mean, are teams collectively doing something wrong? Well, yeah, through the lens of the human arm and the ulnar collateral ligament and just the elbow and the shoulder in general are not meant to throw baseballs 100 miles per hour and really weren't meant to throw them 95 miles per hour, but because of the high injury rate just over the history of the game. Again, injuries have always been there, but when everyone else is doing that, when it's such an arms race, when individuals, and so much, we think about this with the teams, these pitchers as individuals have been doing this for years. And we've seen this with Driveline and all the different, specialized training facilities. It very much is an individualized thing. It's not as though these teams have mandated pitchers to throw as hard as they can. It's a collective culture. It's a systemic issue that goes all the way down to the youth level. I mean, we've talked about it in the past.
Well, I mean, the old Ray Miller, work fast, change speeds, throw strikes, right? Like,
I mean, that still applies, but you still change.
There was
speeds.
more deception in pitching back then than just blowing you away. Curt Schilling could blow you away. Randy, some of those guys could do that, but it was, and Palmer could too. But Palmer didn't. Palmer worked on deception. Palmer worked on the edges. Palmer worked on speeds. This is 98, 96, 98, 100, 98. You're like, and that's when talking to guys like Dave Johnson about it, who had a kid that pitched. And studied pitching and is all he's ever done all his whole life. This is a new phenomenon. Everybody's going to throw the ball as hard as they can every single time they have the ball, because that wasn't the way they were trained for 100 years in baseball.
And it's really, I'm not even sure how much of it is the fastball velocity itself. I think it's also they're throwing breaking balls harder than ever too. I think those are probably where you're finding the most the biggest problems. I mean, the Texas Rangers team doctor, is it Kevin Meister? I think his name's Kevin Meister. It's Meister. He's talked about this where he really wonders, the sweeper has kind of become the new phenomenon, right? The slider that has a little more left to right or right to left rather than downward break. He's really wondered if that's the pitch that's kind of been the silver bullet that's caused this uptick and look, this has been on the rise for years. This is why I kind of laugh when I see the MLB, the players union, just point to the pitch clock. Now, I think the pitch clock is absolutely a variable, but it's one of many variables that have been, kind of mounting over the last 10 to 15 years. But I really do think it's not just throwing fastballs harder. I think it's really the spin. And, one thing that came to came to the spotlight recently. Edwin Diaz, the closer for the Mets, the other night, foreign substance, 10-game suspension. That is absolutely a variable. And when I say foreign substance, I'm not talking about guys that were necessarily doctoring the ball in the way that Gaylord Perry made a Hall of Fame career out of doing it, and everyone just kind of smiled and winked and did that whole song and dance. But with these guys, with the spin they put on the ball, and Tyler Glasnow famously talked about this a few years ago when he hurt his elbow right after that ban came into effect, basically, that to get the spin and the same effect on the ball, you had to grip the ball that much harder and tense up that much harder. And when you're going through that violent motion of throwing the ball, those substances, whether it was rosin, sunscreen, all kinds of different stuff, it wasn't necessarily that you were getting this crazy, unnatural. It's funny to say unnatural because all of this is unnatural when you
Can't
really
get
think about it.
unnatural movement,
Yeah,
but you
but
could grip the ball to
try
yourself.
to try to still get that same spin, but you're gripping it so much harder and you're that much more tense that, think about when your body really tenses up. One of the things they talk about in a car accident, people that tend to not become quite as injured or, a fatal situation, they say their body's more relaxed. Whereas if you really tense up to a crazy degree, that tends to be when more injuries occur. Now, easier said than done if you've ever, heaven forbid, if you're ever in that moment. But it's kind of the same principle here that when they started policing that stuff, and I'm not talking about spider tack, right? Which what Trevor Bauer, I guess, was using that. And that's where you kind of looked at and said, okay, that's over the line. We're not talking about a little bit of sunscreen here or, rosin, whatever. That was to the extreme. We're talking about the guys, which Danny Coulomb recently did a podcast. He estimated before they made that change that probably 80% of pitchers in baseball were using something just to have a better grip on the ball. And look, that impacts performance, but that's also a safety thing too. You want pitchers to be able to command the ball the way they can best that they can command it, so they're not hitting guys in the head either. So that's been a variable. So there's so many different moving parts to this. And I've used the example with you bringing up NASCAR years ago after the tragic death of Dale Earnhardt and restrictor plates on engines, and they don't go as fast as they can. There's no restrictor plate for these arms in terms of max effort and trying to do this. Because if they don't do it, if you're that pitcher, like you're Kyle Bradish today getting cut on and, having Tommy John surgery, but 5 years ago, you were a prospect in the Angels system, or you were being drafted by the Angels and you were trying to get there. If you didn't do all these things, someone else is going to do it, right?
Oh, so like steroids. That was the whole steroids argument.
Yeah. And look, I mean, that was, steroids was a different thing from an ethical standpoint because you're talking about substances that were illegal. This was just tactics in terms of how pitchers are throwing. And I'm not even talking just about the substances on the ball or on their fingers to just have a grip, but that was part of it. So, boy, you and I have sat here and talked about this for 45 minutes. No one has an answer. There's the next Tommy John surgery or the next training tactic or the next piece of technology that can be the red flag that can prevent this and say, hey, this is where you need to be. If you redline this, so to speak, this is when you're going to have a problem. If someone can have some kind of breakthrough that it's never going to eliminate, but can curtail, boy, there's the $25 million idea right there that someone in sports science or sports medicine or whatever it is, internal brace is kind of the new thing with Tommy John surgery that they think expedites the healing a little bit. So, but at the same time, guys are still missing seasons, still altering careers. Pitchers are now undergoing Tommy John multiple times with higher frequency. It's not sustainable to this degree. And this is why we're seeing more and more pitchers. And I guess to bring it back full circle, this is why the Orioles or any team right now, you need to have as many pitchers as you possibly can, because some of them at the very least, and all of them probably, or close to all of them over a long enough timeline, are going to break.
3 more months left before we even get to think about postseason baseball. Still got a month left before the trading deadline. Luke's at the ballpark all week. The Indians in town for another minute. The Rangers will be in all week. And we've had a great conversation about pitching. So if you hear this on Thursday, just, take it for what it's worth. We're having long form chats around here. Had a great week. Maryland Crab Cake Tour went over to Pappas on Tuesday. We're back out on the road giving away the Gold Rush Sevens doublers at Fadley's on the 12th of July. It's going to be a great holiday week around here next week. We got all sorts of great conversations for you. Rock stars, Greg Hawkes from the Cars came on, and Mark Bryan from Hootie and the Blowfish, and we're going to see them Friday night up in Hershey as well. We will not be at Fadley's on Friday, but would encourage you to stop down before the Rangers get to town this weekend and before Joan Jett comes and rock some crimson and clover for me down at Merriweather this weekend. He is Luke. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive.